The Unfamiliar by Thomas Ligotti from Noctuary, Notebook of the Night. He had lost his guide, or else had been abandoned by this seething, wiry native of the city, and now he was wandering through strange streets alone. The experience was not entirely an unwelcome one. From the first instant, he became aware of the separation. Things became more interesting. Perhaps this transformation had begun even in the moments preceding a full awareness of his situation. The narrow entranceway of a certain street, or the shadowed spires of a certain structure, appeared as mildly menacing to the prophetic edges of his vision, pleasantly threatening. Now his eyes were filled with the sight of an infinitely more ominous scene, and a truly foreign one. It was near sundown, and all the higher architectures, the oddly curving roofs, the almost tilting peaks, were turned into anonymous forms with razor-sharp outlines by the low brilliance in the west. And these angular monuments, blocking the sun, covered the streets below with a thick layer of shadows, so that even though a radiant blue sky continued to burn above, down here it was already evening. The torpid confusion of the streets, the crudely musical clatter of alien sounds, became far more mysterious without the daylight, and without his guide. It was as if the city had annexed the shadows and expanded under the cover of darkness, as if it were celebrating incredible things there, setting up all sorts of fabulous attractions. Golden lights began to fill windows and to fall against the crumbling mortar of old walls. His attention was now drawn to a low building at the end of the street, and, avoiding any thought which might diminish his sense of freedom, he entered its lamp-lit doorway. The place was one of indefinite character. Stepping inside, he received a not unwelcome glance from a man who was adjusting some objects on a shelf across the room, and who turned briefly to look over his shoulder at the foreign visitor. At first, this man, who must have been the proprietor, was barely noticeable, for the color and texture of his attire somehow caused him to blend, chameleon-like, into the surrounding decor. The man became apparent only after showing his face, but after he turned away, he retreated back into the anonymity from which he had been momentarily summoned by the intrusion of a customer. Otherwise, there was no one else in the shop, and, left unbothered by its invisible proprietor, he browsed freely among the shelves. What merchandise they held! True curiosities in 1,000 twisting shapes were huddled together on the lower shelves, met one's gaze at eye level, and leered down from dim and dusty heights. Some of them, particularly the very small ones, but also the very largest ones crouched in corners, could not be linked to anything he had ever seen. They might have been trinkets for strange gods, toys place for monsters. His sense of freedom intensified. Now he was nearly overcome with the feeling that something unheard of could very possibly enter his life, something which otherwise might have passed him by. His sensation was one of fear, but fear that was charged with the blackest passion. He now felt himself as the victim of some vast conspiracy that involved the very remotest quarters of the cosmos, countless plots, all converging upon him. Hidden portents were everywhere, and his head was now spinning, first with vague images and possibilities, then with darkness. What place he later occupied is impossible to say. Underground, perhaps, beneath the shop with the peculiar merchandise. Thenceforward, it was always dark, except on those occasions when his keepers would come down and shine a light across the full length of his monstrous form. The victim of a horrible magic, his guide would whisper. But the shining light never disturbed his dreams, since his present shape was equipped with nothing that functioned as eyes. Afterward, money would be collected from the visiting spectators, who were sworn to secrecy before they were allowed to witness this marvel. Still, later, they would be assassinated to ensure the inviolable condition of their vow. But how much more fortunate were they, meeting their deaths with a fresh sense of that exotic wonder which they had traveled so far to experience, than he, for whom all distance is an alien charm, had long ago ceased to exist in the cramped and nameless incarceration in which he had found a horrible home.